Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Why, where we try to help you get behind the why of today's situations and events. And right now, there's a lot going on with the death of Justice Ginsburg, with the continuing mess up in America's psyche. We just want to talk about that this time, let's get behind the why, about all the crazy. What do you say?
There's a lot of crazy, so let's do it.
Let's get behind the why. All right, before we do that, I want to invite you please to like and subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and then hit that little bell. What that will do for you is that whenever we drop a new episode, of course, you'll get a notification to let you know that we did it. Then once you get the new episodes, what we ask you to do is to, first of all, watch it. And then once you watch it, of course, to drop a comment down below so we'll know what you're thinking. We'd love to respond to you. I or my daughter, or both of us, try to respond to every one of those. And then to share it. Let's get this conversation going. Guys, I cannot overemphasize to you how much we need to be talking right now. There's so much miscommunication and misdirection that's happening that I think it becomes really important for us right now.
I saw one woman, she posted, she's like, why were we all taught not to talk about religion and politics?
The two most important things in the world.
And she's like, when we really should have been taught, because most people can't talk about it, right? They get angry, can't really articulate it. And I was like, that's a really good point. Like,
people will say things like that, and they'll say, you know, I don't have my religion doesn't come in and influence my decisions.
Oh, yes, it does.
Then I say to them, either you're lying about what your religion is, or you're lying.
Or you don't believe what your religion is.
Or you're lying.
It doesn't influence your life, right?
That's the whole idea behind religion, that it influences and informs the way you live. That's why it's so important for those of us who call ourselves believers to have a Christian worldview.
Right.
We need to see the world the way that God said we should see it. And that begins with us, Romans chapter 12, right? That we need to see ourselves soberly, seeing ourselves and our circumstances, our situations, the way God said we're supposed to see ourselves. And that's what gives us that firm foundation, keeps us from being deceived. Now, one of the things, and I do want to send my condolences out to the family of Justice Ginsburg. It's always hard when a family member passes, even if you're expecting it, even if you're watching, you're sitting by the deathbed, it's still hard. So my condolences to the family, and I hope that the grace of God will reach out to them and draw them closer to Himself. But with that being said, I am bothered by something I heard in connection with her death. And I want to talk about that and the connection of BLM, we'll call it RBG.
RBG.
And the attack on the Christian philosophy and faith in this country. And I want to tie these three together because I think they are very definitely linked. So let's talk about it. One of the things that stood out to me that really came across as weird, or I don't know, maybe sobering might be a better word. And sobering because we have accepted it as normal. That's what I find just kind of in your face, is that we've accepted it as being normal. Now you hear what I mean? Yeah. When Justice Ginsburg died, it said, the news media came on, they were talking, they said, we've left a vacancy in the liberal wing of the Supreme Court. Now, if you've accepted the lie, if you accepted the normality of that statement, then it doesn't even ruffle your feathers, because you'll say something like, oh yeah, we need to get another liberal. And here's the problem with that. Even if we had said the opposite, we've left a gap in the conservative side.
Which we often do say.
Yes, because we bought the lie.
Yeah.
Because, see, the Supreme Court is not supposed to be liberal or conservative.
It's supposed to be constitutional.
It's supposed to be constitutional.
Right.
And so now that we have people sitting on the court, and we have a whole philosophy of people, including the three arms of government, when you think about this, I have my camera that you can't see because, well, you're on the other side of the camera. It is on a tripod.
Right.
If I disable or cripple one of those legs, the tripod will fall. And the founding fathers of this country established this nation to have a tripod effect of government.
Right.
The executive branch, which is the president, he's the one who's in charge of executing the laws. We have the legislative branch, which is responsible for writing or creating the laws. And then we have the judicial branch, which is supposed to do that. What's the word I'm looking at? Preside over judging the law. And so now when we suck those branches together, and whether it's the executive branch drawing in the court to be its buddy, or the judicial branch buddying up to the legislative branch. And what we've gone from a tripod to at best a bipod. And what you have with a bipod is that you have to have a controlling hand to keep it up. The thing about a tripod is that with the 3 legs, it'll stand on its own.
Right.
But a unipod,
Unipod.
yeah, you have those.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have just a little
Right,
pole,
just like
and
the
they
little
give you that
thing,
stabilizer, but you got to have a controlling factor. So with that unopod, we have to have a king, a queen, or a hidden hand controlling
Monarchy.
it. Yeah, it's a
Dictator
monarchy.
or something
with,
like that.
With a bipod.
Right.
The same truth is there. It's less obvious, but you have to have a hidden power controlling it. Somebody who's able to say, I want to lean this way, I want to lean that way. There's no balance, no counterbalance. So with the death of Justice Ginsburg and all this discussion now about replacing it with a conservative or not, we need to get another liberal. And I was so saddened. This morning, my phone went off and I just happened to roll off and looked at it and had a notification. And I can't remember tell you which show it was, but some guy had done this montage of liberals who heard that Justice Ginsburg had died. And they went from cussing her out to yelling and screaming and cussing America.
Right.
I'm just like, whoa, we've missed it.
Well, and it's so sad because I saw a billboard, and this has been because she's been struggling or battling cancer for 5 years? Something like
At least 5 different times.
A long
with
time,
cancer,
right?
yes.
Yeah, something like that. But anyways, there's this billboard that said, hang in there, Ruth, we need you. Because they need her in the court, right? And you think back, so when President Obama was still in office.
Right.
Okay. Ruth Bader was getting up there in age.
And she was sick
And
then.
she was sick. She's been sickly for a while. And so some people, liberals, were saying, hey, she should retire so that we
Right.
can fill her seat with another like-minded liberal. Ruth didn't want, she's like, no, I don't want to retire as long as I'm still sharp in the head. I'm going
Right.
to do my job, right? So she stayed there. And now she's not there anymore, so now there's this vacancy. But really, I say all this because you look at really what it's producing these people, like the video you saw. And I'm like, they really don't care about Ruth, okay? I see pins people wear are have pictures of her or T-shirts. This huge person people look up to. But like you said, she passes away. And what are they saying? They're cursing her out.
Cursing her out.
Why? Because they don't care about the person. It's again, it goes back to that philosophy behind it, wanting to fill this seat. And I'm like, oh man.
And now we see already the fight that's been played.
Oh my gosh.
And it's the fight not because or for a qualified justice. It's because the powers that be want a liberal justice.
Right.
So the fight's going to be on. And Rich McConnell's already said they're going forward with the appointment for a new justice to, again, keeping his word.
Right.
President Trump had already given a list of who the Supreme Court justices would be. I just, again, guys, I want to go on record. Some of you guys have accused me of saying this. President Trump is not my pastor, but he is my president. Yeah. And what he has done is that he's made some promises and he's kept some promises. And that is by far better than what we've seen. We look at the overarching canopy of what's gone on since Reagan, and I tell you, there ain't been a dime's worth of difference in presidents. They all have their own little push,
right.
And they've done little things here and there, but the overall tendency of the nation has been toward ungodliness. And that's what I mean when I say it hadn't been a dime's worth of difference in the presidents. Abortion has gotten continually worse. The conditions of our schools have gotten continually worse. The job situations have gotten continually worse. The literacy, I mean, all these things that we look at in our nation, they've gone the wrong way. Our inner cities have just corroded in on themselves. They're battle zones. And I had the privilege of sitting with some brothers, and at least one, and for sure, had gone over and spent some time in an active combat zone. And he made a comment to me that I heard other people say. But he said this to me, and maybe it's because he's my brother. And maybe it's because he said it to my face, that it sank a little deeper. And he said, I'd be doggone if I can go overseas and get shot up and blown up in a war that's not even my own and come home and not be free in my own country. And I heard that statement said about back in 1940s during World War II and in Vietnam. But again, having my brother say that to me contemporarily, it put it in a whole new light. And I started thinking again about the world in which we live in. We have this country, and it's by design. The country we see is by design. And you think about the people who've been in charge. Ginsburg has been a Supreme Court justice for 25 years.
Right. Yes, not since 93.
93.
Longer than,
yeah. So
27.
we have people in office who've shaped this country. We look at Joe Biden, who's been in office for 47 years. They have shaped this nation. Yeah. So when we look at the condition of this nation, we have to look at the people who made it.
Well, that's what gets me. So people, saying, "Oh, everything's white supremacist," or, and in a lot of ways, like we talk about the criminal justice system, and I'm kind of like, okay, there's other facts you can even refute that, but let's just say, okay, it is. Then the same people who say this is a white supremacist system, like you're saying, they're the ones that constructed it.
They're the one that built it.
And all of a sudden they're going to fix
the
it?
Three strikes,
you know what I mean? So
three
it's
strikes rule was done under Clinton and Biden and Kamala Harris all voted for it.
If you just take a minute and think.
Yeah, all these people were unhonored. They created the atmosphere that they're now decrying.
Right.
That they're saying, it's horrible, it's horrible. I'm like, okay, it's horrible, but you made it.
Yeah. I was like, if it's as horrible as saying, you made it.
So I'm looking at this, and we have this. Now we have this whole thing with Black Lives Matter coming up, and again, it's the sleight of hand. And what gets me, and I see it over and over and over again, and this is what hurts my heart, is that black people in this case are going to be the targeted losers. We're going to be the targeted losers because they're using the platform of black angst and black pain to promote their political position, which is anti-family. If you look at it, it's anti-black. If you really look at it, and I know people may get mad at me for saying that, but I'm saying read what they say about themselves.
They've edited their website a little bit since they first came out. I'm like, yeah, because they were getting pushback.
We've been telling people to look at it.
So it's a little sanitized.
You send money to Black Lives Matter, and guess where it goes? To the DNC. Antifa, to the DNC. And so these people have constructed this. This is not happening by mistake. And so now we're seeing ourselves in this civil war in America. And right now, this war is still, for the most part, an ideological war. Right. Although we are seeing skirmishes. We had, in 3 different cities in this country, we had cops ambushed.
Right. You don't think that's like an accident?
Yeah, these things are orchestrated by evil. And as I've said before, and I go back to this, and I told you guys 1,000 times, as an actor, I love Denzel Washington. But Denzel, if by any stroke of imagination you wind up watching this podcast, I'm giving you a direct order, sir. You cannot play bad guys. Can't do it.
Because he does it
You mess with my head. You do it too good.
I know he's a good actor. You're like,
man.
oh.
He broke off that piece in Training Day.
Right.
I watched it because it was Denzel, and I was mad at him the whole time. I was like, Denzel, you'll be ashamed of yourself. But he worked it. When he says there's one scene in the movie, he's sitting there talking to his little boy, and he said, the game is chess. It ain't checkers. Right. And I'm just like, you right.
Yeah.
You ever hit down here playing checkers? We slide in this 2-dimensional game. No. It's 3-dimensional, man. Sometimes 4-dimensional. If you get from the powers that be, the elites.
Right.
The elites who are calling the shots, they're playing chess.
Right.
But what I like to point you out to is there's a power above them. And that's the spiritual realm, you see, because there's the principalities and powers and rulers in darkness as the high places who are controlling these people. And they may not even be aware of it, but it doesn't change the reality of it.
Which goes back for the believer. I think a lot of believers are playing checkers.
Oh, gosh, yes.
The church playing checkers.
The church is playing checkers.
These different pastors promoting Black Lives Matter. You're playing checkers because really, you're right. Our battle's not against flesh and blood.
They're not even up to the chess level.
Right.
Not even to think about the spiritual level as Christians, as people who are, especially has been educated. We were talking about this the other day in Bible study in Peter. It says that there are false teachers, and they teach you in such a way that you don't realize it's not easy to understand that they're wrong. Because
they're convincing.
Because it sounds good. When you preach this social gospel, it sounds good. It sounds like if I do this, man, I'm going to really get there. But they're playing checkers on a chessboard. See, they're sliding around, and the queen is flying over, going, "Gotcha."
Right. Or like you said with like the football analogy, they're going east to west when they should be going. So you're not really taking any ground. Right. You're just going back and forth.
Running hard from sideline to sideline.
Right.
And if you the other team, you're like, run hard. Run hard.
Get worn out.
Throw that lateral pass. Yes, keep
Wear
it going.
yourself out. Go ahead.
And I've seen games like
Right.
that. The first NFL game I went to, it was the Raiders versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I went to it there at Raider Stadium in L.A. Marcus Allen was the star running back in that game. Matter of fact, he was the only offensive player to score other than the field goal kicker. The game ended 7-0. The whole game, the entire, and this just lucked out for us because the whole game was played inside the 20-yard line. But of course, you flip the field. So they would go down and the field get flipped and they come back and play the rest right there in front of us. And Marcus Allen was the only one who scored, who crossed the goal line that day. And you watch that whole game for the most part, side to side. And the defensive coach was like, yeah, they were happy for that. When we as Christians started doing that, it reminds me of something my grandmother told me when I was a little child. She said, boy, worrying is like sitting in a rocking chair. You're always moving, but you ain't going nowhere.
You're stressing out.
Yeah, you're
not
you're getting it done, but you ain't going nowhere. And that's what I see in the church in America today. You ask yourself the question, how is it that we can live in a nation that boasts itself of having many millions of Christians in almost every walk of life, and yet we have such a hedonistic society?
Even, oh my gosh, okay, so I was testing something the other day. I went on Roku TV, right? And I go just see the channels, different channels you can add. And there's like faith-based. So I went, because like how many are there? And there's so many like churches that have like a channel on there, like hundreds. I'm like, there's so many Christian resources. And yeah, so it begs the question. I'm like, you go outside, there's a church on every corner. But yet we still have this
hedonistic society.
Which, I mean, we already know the world's going to be that way.
But a lot of it's because, again, the church is playing checkers on a chessboard.
Right. I think it's more so, we know society's going to be jacked, but it's why
the
is the church not
the
being
church.
effective? Right.
So we look at what BLM is doing and how they are, and they're not in the news as quite as much as they had been, but, they're still out there and they're still doing what they do. And I think the closer we get to the election, the less you're going to hear of that, because the DNC needs to separate itself from a little bit.
Right.
They start to push back from the radical side. They've used it.
We already saw that. Now that's more like climate change.
Yes,
kind of
yes.
getting
They're
away
all
from it.
Antifa, BLM, they're like golf clubs in a bag.
Right.
When you go out on the course, you carry your 9 clubs in your bag. Unless you like me, you carry 14 clubs because you never know what you might need. But you pull out your club depending on what shot you need. You know what I'm saying? And that's what the powers that be. You look at what's happening now. They pulled out the BLM club and they driving it downfield. Woo! Big hits, right?
And then they're like, oh, we're done with that.
And then they got Antifa breaking up in there, so we need to get this riot kicked off right here. And so Antifa goes and gets hit it out of the grass, and they get in there. And then they want to put it in there, and then they get these guys smooth talking going, well, we're really upset that this is and they didn't even get mad about the riots until they got called out on it.
Right.
And now they're trying to put it in. And I say it's like we got to be smarter. Again, guys, we have to think about the America you live in. It's not happening. It's being created. Right. It's being made. We have people who are sitting in office and who have been in office for years, and we have the powers that be behind them. And we've heard the name Soros, the Rockefellers, all these guys with more money than they could burn if they tried. And they're making decisions, and these things keep coming up. The Clinton Foundation, these names keep coming up, and we just keep choosing to ignore it. We keep choosing to ignore it, and you're like, guys, at least do yourself the honest favor of getting behind the why.
Ask the questions.
Look behind it. Don't just jump on board. Something that my pastor, F.D. Reach, told me when I was a child. This was in the late 70s, going into the 80s, right around that era. It was right around the time, right after the time of the James Jones, the Ghana cult situation. And I was asking him about a situation in my life because I was starting to feel the call of the Lord, and I was trying to sort some things out as a young man. And I asked him the question about making decisions, and he told me, you got to make sure you make the right decision. And I said to him, well, what if I'm really sincere? And he had brought up, and he brought the condition of the Guyana cult. He said, Brother Ellis, he said, imagine if you had been out in the yard working for your mama on this hot August day and then growing up in the South, and in the summer it's hot and muggy. And I said, yeah. He said, can you imagine how hot you would be? Your skin's all hot. He said, yes, and you go in the house, and you open the refrigerator, and there's a nice cold can of Coke sitting there. And he said, can you see that can of Coke? He was creating what we call an emotional word picture. He wanted me to experience this moment. He was doing a great job of it because I was starting to salivate a little bit, you know. And he said, can you see the can? He's going to reach in and grab it. And I'm like, I got it. He said, can you feel that cold can in your hand? I'm like, yeah, I can feel it. He said, now, can you see the condensation running off the side? The water just dripping down the side. Yeah, he goes, and you pop it over, go, I go, yeah, I'm ready to take a drink, right? He goes, now you take a big drink of that Coke. He said, what if it has strychnine poison in it?
Well, you're going to die.
I said, whoa, just burst my bubble. He said, what if you sincerely believed it was just Coke? He said, you be sincerely dead because what you thought doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that there was poison in that can. And you can drink it believing it was straight. Just like those people did at Guyana Cult. They drank the Kool-Aid, right? And so this is what we are today. We here in America, we're being presented with a lot of stuff, guys. There's a lot of stuff going on. And we've got to just stop and have the conversation. This whole thing with critical race theory. How is it, please, somebody with intelligence, answer me in the comments. Tell me how it is okay for me to put one group of people down at the expense of another. Somebody explain that to me, and that's all I need to know. If you could tell me how that's okay, especially when you're telling me that the one people who've been disenfranchised by another group.
Right.
So now you want to lift one group up by putting another group down?
I asked that very question when I was in school, and I had a professor, sweet lady, very well-meaning, and even she refuted me saying, well, have you thought about the degrees of oppression? And I'm thinking, why does that matter? So people who are going to claim like, no, it is justifiable. If someone's been oppressed, you know, it's just fair that we even the playing field. But they're not operating in a worldview or even a thought process that's remotely rooted in reality, or true morality, because they're taking into degrees, right? We go back to intersectionality. And so she's saying the degree of oppression. Well, if someone experienced more oppression, well then, you know, that's going to determine all these different. I'm like, okay, so you can't really reason with people like that. You know, that's what it comes down to. And there are certain things, we've been talking about this a lot, that there's to some degree, actually no, not in some degree, just the truth of the matter is, people are blind. If someone's deceived, they don't even know they're deceived. They're not even willing to consider that they're wrong. The only way you're going to reach someone like that, especially as a believer, is praying, Lord, open their eyes, the Holy Spirit, draw them.
What did Jesus say? He said, the light of the body is the eye, and if that light is dark, behold, whoa, how deep is that darkness? Right. So we have to come back to that objectionable truth, that objective truth, which is the Word of God. Right. We have to come back to that. And so one of the things I want to point out before we go any further with this conversation, because there's a lot of things, like I said, with the replacement of Justice Ginsburg, with this raising up, this craziness that we're seeing sweep the nation, where people are just starting to not only kill people, shoot police officers, but there's people filming it and recording it and cheering it. You know, reminds me what the Bible says in Romans. You know, not only do you do these things, you take pleasure in them that do them. Again, we see the Bible being proven true right in front of our eyes. But one thing I want to point out, and this is a conflation that I see happening a lot, is that the role of the government is to enforce civic and criminal law. The role of the church is to enforce or live up to Christian standards. Right. They're two different things. I do not expect the church to have the role of the government. Right. And I do not expect the government to have the role of the church. For instance, we talked about this the other day. If I have a criminal coming into my country, the role of government is to apprehend that criminal. Right. So the criminal the criminal is arrested by the powers of the state, of the powers of the government. Okay, if that criminal, and this is one of those things that rub people wrong, if that criminal has in their possession a child, the child is innocent. So therefore, the adult is taken into custody and the child is taken into protective custody. Right. Now, the child is not a citizen of the country. So he's not going to be treated like any other citizen, and he still has family somewhere else. So the primary role of the government then is to find family for that child and reattach that child to his family. And yes, the child is kept in custody during that time. Now, there's a responsibility of the government then to protect and provide for that child because they're in protective custody.
Right.
Now, the role of the church, I see that person trying to come to, as an individual, as a church, my job is to treat them differently than it would be for government. See, as a Christian, I can take that person in, I can cover that person, I can provide for that person. But then as a citizen, I need to report them as a criminal.
Right.
Okay, it's the same thing. That's why you can say as a Christian, we see cases in court all the time where the family of a murder victim says, I forgive the person that killed my son.
Right.
But then the person still goes to prison.
Right.
Because that's the role of government.
There's one thing, I totally get what you're saying, but my brain has a hard time understanding it completely. Here's why. Because as a Christian, we say this all the time, we can't compartmentalize. Because I can see people easily being like, yes, as a Christian, this is what I do, but as a civic person, I believe that everyone has a right to choose. A woman has a right to choose, okay? People do that already. And so I see what you're saying, and I think it's true. However, it's also godly for me to turn in the criminal.
Right.
Okay? Because God is just.
That's your Christian
you know what I mean?
duty.
And so I don't see it as actually separated at all.
No, it's not. But what I mean is that what I'm trying to say is the government doesn't have the Christian responsibility.
Right. I think that's a better way to say it. Is
the
what
government
Christians are doing, I think. A lot of Christians are wanting the government to do the job that a Christian should do. Hence, you see people saying, you know, I don't know why I went British accent just then, but, but you know, people we hear, I hear people saying that, you know, the Bible says that we should give to the poor, and so they want the government, therefore, to give out of my pocket to the poor.
Right.
When really it's like, no,
it's for you to give
for
to the
me.
poor.
Right? Jesus called me to give the shirt off my back,
right?
Not the government to give
the
my shirt off my back. You know,
exactly.
And that's the difference. I see what you're saying.
The government has a job to enforce laws and civic law,
Right.
Both civic.
But as a Christian,
and,
we operate
civil,
differently.
civic, and criminal law. That's the government's job. As a Christian, my job is to live up to the Christian standard.
Right.
And so those are two different things.
Right.
I ask guys all the time. People get all crazy about the whole border issue, and I know we hadn't talked about this in a while, but I go back to the same standard. You don't think the country should be protected, okay? Don't lock your house at night. Anybody in the world can just walk up in your house and come in anytime they want. Oh, no, that's stupid. Well, duh, yes, it's stupid. And it's also stupid to let that happen in a country.
Right.
You know, especially when you have people who are trying to destroy your country. Don't you remember 9/11, guys? These people came into the country, they came in here, and they killed Americans. If they had been properly vetted and properly trapped, possibly those guys could still be alive. So I'm just trying to say that we have a responsibility. The government has a responsibility to protect the country.
Right.
As a Christian, you have the responsibility to love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's true, but that's an individual call. Right. And if you're in a position of civic duty or civil responsibility, then yes, that's going to be reflected in how you do your job. But you still can't neglect the law unless it's an unjust law.
Right. And that's like one thing I think that's really kind of bothering me. So Tim Keller, he's a really well-known pastor, right? And recently he's been saying some things that are kind of questionable, kind of being very appeasing to kind of these leftist ideals. He wouldn't say he is, but it's giving it really kind of this license to not necessarily call something wrong that's wrong.
Right.
It's giving the license to not call sin, sin.
Sin is sin.
And I was like, as a Christian, like you're saying, yes, we have the obligation to be civically minded too. However, civically minded ultimately with being kingdom minded, right? So I can't just get rid of truth.
I go back to, so we think about this, and again, just going back to that point, that government has a role that's defined by law. The law is where government derives its power of and for and by the people. We vote on laws, those laws are committed, and then the government has to enforce those laws.
And as a Christian, we want to put in people.
We put people into office who's going to do that. Right. Which brings me back to my original point of this whole thing that just really made me sad when I heard the commentators say this today, or the news media, however you want to call them, whatever they're supposed to be these days, that leaves a vacancy in the liberal side of the court. I'm thinking, the fact that we have begun to speak this way and think this way tells me how far we have come away from the purity. I hear people talking all the time about America has never been great. and they want to just tear up the foundation of America. And you go, yeah, if you neglect the law, ignore the law, you have what we have now.
Right.
But because we've had laws that had their foundation in righteousness.
Because truth is truth.
Yeah, you could have a slave stand up and say, truth. I have a right to be free.
Right, and they can appeal to
by
that
the laws of the land. I have a right to be free.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people just seem to be blocking out of their minds right now, is that the foundation was good. Yes, absolutely. When the founding fathers said, we hold these truths, all men are you know the thing.
Okay, Joe. All men are created equal.
But my point is that, yeah, they were talking about predominantly white men who were landowners.
Right.
That's a historical idea. We know that. That's not a fact. But the law was in place that some other men go, hey, I'm part of all men.
Right.
And they could appeal to that and say, hey, I'm part of all men.
Just like in the Bible, okay,
yes.
when it says men, guess what? Even in the Bible, what is Jesus? There's neither male nor male nor female. So we know if it says men, it's talking to me too.
That's
like,
right.
you know,
that's why the suffragettes could say, right? What? We're part of men.
We're part of men.
And that's why a black man could say, we're part of men.
Part of men. Yeah.
And so this is what I'm saying. So people start saying, well, this was written on. Of course, people. Nobody's arguing that people are perfect. The only one's perfect is Jesus.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is that God
perfect,
has used men to give us a tool that allowed us to create the greatest nation this world has ever known. And we're now on the verge of throwing it away because we have ignored the enemy of our soul. The Bible tells us that our weapons are not carnal, but they're mighty through God, the pulling down of strongholds. And part of that pulling down is cast down imagination, any high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God. That means when you have thoughts that are contradictory to God, the Word of God has the ability to pull that in. We subdue men's arguments. Why? Not by overwhelming them with our wit, but by revealing them the truth of what God has said. And when people see that, if you have an honest heart, you'll be compelled to obey God.
Right.
If you have a dishonest heart.
Recently, Pastor John MacArthur, he's been talking a lot about even just the state of the nation. And he had a sermon, he was talking about really what government is to do. And it's not a lot of what we're talking about here, right? And he's saying that these different things, because of the foundation that we have, the way government works, right? Law and order, it really helps to keep the peace and to maintain the way our country has been, to even be able to be a place of freedom and really liberty, to be able to live in liberty, right?
Truth.
And it's because why? Because it's rooted in that foundation of truth, biblical principle, right? We see this attack on law enforcement, right? As soon as that happens, and we get rid of police, then what? You know, because you're not going to get rid of police. It's just going to be an ungodly institution, right?
Yeah.
You know?
So we think about this. Right now, we've made it legal in this country to attack, especially white, male, heterosexual Christian. That's a free target. And I say to you, and I look you straight in your eye and ask you this question. After they've taken down the first target, what do you think they're going to do? You think black Christians are going to be safe?
They're already not. You kidding me? Being a black conservative is
I'm talking Christian now. You think black Christians are going to be saved?
Huh.
You think Chinese or Korean Christians are going to be saved? You think American Indian Christians, or what we call Native American Christians, going to be saved? No.
Right.
You see, once we start identifying segments of our population that can be targeted, then we're all going to be targeted. It's just a matter. It's just injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
Right. It's like we say.
You missed that.
What?
That's echo of Dr. King. You just missed it.
I'm sorry.
You meant to say, we missed that one. That was a good one.
I'm sorry, Daddy. That is really good.
That was a good one. That was a good one.
That was good. That was good.
Okay.
That was really good.
All right. So.
I was going to say something, but you made me forget. Oh, I remember what I was going to say, and I'm going to say it.
Say it.
I'm going to say it, because it's just as good as that quote.
Go ahead.
Kind of. Okay. But really, I was just going to say it's a slow fade.
Yes.
And I've even heard a lot of pastors recently say, oh my gosh, if you say the church is being persecuted, like, you're ridiculous. And I'm kind of like, what? You think they're going to come knock on your door and kill you tomorrow? It doesn't start like that, okay? Because people would be totally shocked and fight back.
Right.
But when it's a slow fade, and you give up your rights, you surrender,
little by little,
your rights. That's how it happens. It doesn't happen overnight.
Look at the church in Germany. That's probably the best example.
Right.
The church in Germany.
And Romania, too.
From Martin Luther. From Martin Luther, selling his thesis on the door, to we're okay to kill Jews and anybody who don't agree with us.
Right.
It's a slap. And the further you go down, the more speed you pick up. That's just the way it works.
But be sober. And when you see it starting to slide.
Be vigilant. Be sober. Why? Because your enemy, the devil, is like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. If you don't know the word, if you don't know the truth, in other words, if you don't know the why, you can find yourself deceived. So, do like I say here. Take your moment. Flip it around. Get behind the why.
Yep. Ask the questions.
When they tell you the story, listen what they say. Smile at them. Get behind the why.
Also, go to the book.
Remembering
to the
book.
That your opinion does not matter.
What does your opinion matter?
Man, that was a hard lesson for me to learn, man. But I learned it.
Your opinion don't matter.
Still learning it.
Check the word, because it comes down to it. Only God. Let God be true and every man a liar. That's what we say. So until next time, take a moment. Do yourself a favor. Do this nation a favor. Do your family, your neighborhood, everybody a favor. When you hear things come up, even when you hear what I'm saying, check me out. Get behind the why. And you see that you walk on a much more sure ground when you're not deceived. Until next time, peace. Love you guys.